the city. We run the town.
Yeah, Grand Rising, y'all. Is we ready? Day 10? Day 10. What shall it bring? Let me let me put a poll up. Let me get a poll going. Hope everybody doing well. Oh shit. Oh, I heard my own voice. It scared the hell out of me.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We are still waiting for a verdict to be rendered in Florida versus Scott Peterson. This comes after a little over 8 hours of deliberations over the last 2 days. The 60-year-old faces child neglect and culpable negligence charges for not intervening in the 2018 Parkland school shooting. Now, we are going to be sure to bring you that verdict when it's decided. We want you to get the up-to-speed knowledge of what we know, so we'll keep a very careful eye on that courtroom feed and let you know the latest. But for now, we are going to focus our attention on a different case, and that is the YNW Melly double murder trial, also out of Broward County, Florida. 24-year-old Jamell stands accused of fatally shooting his two friends back in 2018. Victims Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas Jr. were in the car with the defendant, as well as his co-defendant, Cortland Henry, on the night in question. Now, Demmons and Henry claim to be victims of a drive-by shooting, but authorities later found evidence to suggest that the shooting took place from inside the vehicle, leaving Henry and Demmons the culprits of this crime. Now, yesterday, we heard testimony from the medical examiners who performed the autopsies on the victims. And to get a little bit more detail into what that means and what happened, we're going to go right now to our boots on the ground, Law and Crime's Terry Austin. Terry, good to see you. You were in that courtroom. It's good to see you this morning. So the autopsies for each victim, they were conducted by two different medical examiners. Can you tell us what exactly was the cause and manner of death for each of the victims, Mr. Williams and Mr. Thomas?
Well, the first autopsy was done by Dr. Rebecca McDougall, and she did the autopsy of Anthony Williams, and she said the cause and manner of death was multiple gunshot wounds, and that was by homicide. So she explained that the first bullet was the bullet that killed him, and it came in the back of the neck. She said he was shot twice more, but that those bullets were shot after he had already died. And she told the jury that she knew that because there was no hemorrhaging from those second two shots. The second autopsy was done by someone else in the medical examiner's office, and that was Dr. Adrienne Sauter, and she did the autopsy for Christopher Thomas, and she said his first shot also killed him, and that shot was to the cheek. She said he was shot multiple times after that, and the most pivotal part of her testimony was they put side by side the pictures of the bullet holes entering into the body and pictures of the bullet holes in the car, and she said that those bullet holes on Christopher Thomas matched the pattern of the bullet holes inside that car. So both of them said the cause and manner of death was gunshot wounds and it was homicide.
Wait, let's amplify that a little bit. Are you suggesting that the medical examiners in this case, they gave the point that the shooting happened from inside the vehicle? And if so, let's amplify that a little, because I think that's the key question, because if the jury believes this happened from inside the car, that could be the end of the case. So are you saying the medical examiner's testimony supported that?
And you better believe, Jesse, that the defense objected to that because she is not an expert on forensics. She's a medical examiner. And the defense said, look, she should be testifying about the autopsy, not about what was happening in that car. But apparently, during her deposition, she did say that she went to the site. And because of that, she learned that the pattern was similar. And the judge did allow her to say that the pattern of the bullets were similar to the pattern of the defects on the body. So, yes, I do think it was damaging. It showed side by side. And even if you weren't an expert, it actually did look like it was the exact same pattern. So whether or not the jury picked up on that, I don't know. But I think of all of the evidence that's gone in so far, that medical examiner saying that the bullets matched the back of that car. And again, it was let in because the judge said she went to the site and she compared it herself, and she was learning how to compare those bullets to those injuries.
Okay, now let's talk about, you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are the shots that killed them at first, killed the victims initially, but then there were repeat shots. Now, I find that interesting because it would seem to suggest that if you are staging a drive-by shooting after murdering these two individuals, it's not surprising you have subsequent shots. However, do we have any idea about the length of time between the first shots and the last shots?
Well, that's also another good question, Jesse. What both of the medical examiners are saying is they cannot pinpoint it exactly. They can tell you that it was after the individuals passed away because there was no hemorrhaging, but they cannot tell you if it was 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. All they can tell you is that first shot was the shot that killed the victims because there was hemorrhaging at the entry site of those first shots. But what they both said was because there was no hemorrhaging for the other bullet that they had already passed away, but they could not tell us how long. And that's another good question because you want to know whether or not it was staged, but they could not say that.
Now let's talk about the defense. Did they have the opportunity to cross-examine the medical examiners, or are they going to do that today or continue that today?
They did cross-examine the medical examiners. Stuart Adelson was the one who did the cross-examination, and he did point out that, neither of those medical examiners have any information as far as what happened on that scene. They didn't dispute the fact that those first shots were the shots that actually kill the victims. So they're not disputing what the medical examiner found when they did the autopsies. They're simply disputing that those medical examiners cannot testify as to what is going on in that car.
By the way, are these the last witnesses for the state, the medical examiners, or do we think the state is going to call anyone else before they wrap up their case?
Well, the state did say yesterday that they were going to call someone named Christopher Williams, and as I understand it, he is the forensic expert who's going to talk about the crime scene. So I think they're going to try to connect what the medical examiner really could not connect, either one of them, because they obviously are not forensic experts. They are simply doing the autopsies of those two bodies.
Yeah, and I can imagine why you would save that witness for last. And then now let's talk about the defense. When the prosecution wraps up, do we have any idea about what the defense's case is going to look like, who they may call, whether or not the defendant will take the stand?
Yes, I don't know whether Melly's going to take the stand. I would say still at this point, even though I do think the prosecution made some points yesterday with the medical examiner, I still, if I were that defense team, would not put Melly on that stand, but they're probably considering that. I do think they're going to bring experts into the case to refute whatever the forensics have been so far, particularly even going way back to the gun expert, the DNA expert. I think they're going to try to say, look, none of his DNA was there. You can't say he had the gun. You don't have the gun. I think they're going to try to establish that the prosecution really is relying on simply circumstantial evidence. But sometimes, as we know, that does prove the case. But here, they haven't connected those dots.
Well, it sounds like a busy day, rowdy atmosphere. People were talking during your live shot, Terry. Don't they know that Terry Austin is doing the hard-hitting reporting? They need to quiet down, but it's okay. I know you have to head into that courtroom. Thank you for your reporting. Great as always. And we're going to see you later, Terry. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jeff.
All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Well, she said it. They did, and they put him inside the car, the fatal shots. The fatal shots came from within the car. I mean, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? What? I don't know, I'm curious to see is what witnesses called after this medical examiner. I really am. Hmm.
Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. So we're waiting for day 10 of the double murder trial for rapper YNW Melly to start up again. Remember, 24-year-old rapper Jamell stands accused of killing his two friends back in October of 2018 and then claimed to be part of a hit and run. This is what he claimed, and we know that the prosecution is saying that this was a staged drive-by shooting. So while we wait for today's proceedings to start up again, I want to go back to what we didn't get to yesterday afternoon, and that is the testimony of Dr. Sauter. Dr. Sauter was the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy of victim Christopher Thomas Jr., also known as YNW Juvie. So let's dip into the direct examination and see what Dr. Sauter had to say.
Let me know. Have you memorized every single projectile and every single wound track they go through?
No.
Okay. With regards to going back, I'm going to go back to just the photo of the projectile on the one that's from the right chest. What wound path did that equate with? And if you need to look at your report, please let me know.
Can I look at my report, please? The projectile that corresponds to the right chest is the projectile from wound P.
That's objection. Sure. There's an objection pending. Counsel objects to reading from the report. So just read it to yourself, and then when you're done, you put your note down and just you can indicate if your memory is refreshed, you can answer the question. All right?
Okay.
So, Dr. Sauter, after reviewing the report, are you able to tell the right chest which wound peak that came from?
From the entry of wound P.
Okay. So now going on to the right upper quadrant of the abdomen that's labeled as projectile 2. Do you recall where that particular projectile was recovered from?
I need to look at my report.
Please, if you would, refresh your recollection, look up once you are done.
That corresponds to the entry of labeled R.
Oh. So moving on to, in this particular photo here, what are we looking at?
That is one of the other projectiles that I recovered.
Okay. Is that next photo that we were looking at projectile 3 from the left chest?
Yes.
Do you recall which projectile 3, which wound track it came from?
I would have to look at my report.
Please refresh your recollection if you need to. And once you're done, look up.
That corresponds to the entrance wound O.
Okay. Going on to the picture and next photo that we are looking at, what does this depict?
That is another projectile that I recovered from the axilla.
And what is the axilla?
That is the area near your armpit.
Okay. And is that the next photo, projectile number 4?
Yes.
And do you recall which wound path letter that corresponds to?
I would have to look at my report again.
If you need to refresh your recollection, please feel free to do so.
That corresponds to the entrance labeled N.
N is in Nancy?
Correct.
Okay. So moving on to the next projectile number 5 from that says left axilla.
Yes.
And so which wound tract was this particular projectile recovered from?
I would have to look at my report again.
If you need to refresh your recollection, please feel free to do so.
That corresponds to the entrance wound labeled K.
Going on to the next projectile number 6. The right lower chest on that. So before we get to that, I noticed on the envelopes that we're looking at, it says pathologist Rebecca McDougall. That's not you.
Yes.
Why does it say her name on there?
Because she was supervising me during the autopsy.
Okay, so going on to projectile number 5, right lower chest. Where was this projectile recovered from?
May I look at my report, please?
Please go to refresh your recollection. Whenever you're ready.
The entrance letter corresponds to Q.
Okay. Going on to the next photo, what are we looking at here?
You are looking at the liver with a rod to show that there are defects to the liver.
And the defects that are shown, what are they?
They correspond to the trajectory of one of the gunshot wounds.
And in terms of normal anatomical position, where is the liver found?
That is found on your right side of your abdomen.
Going on to the next photo here, let me turn that one. What are we looking at in this photo?
That is a photograph depicting the heart, and the rods are showing 2 defects to the heart.
And in terms of the hemorrhage on the heart, is that shown in this photo?
The hemorrhage is from the blood that was in the pericardium, which is the sac that contains the heart.
In terms of do you have an opinion as to whether or not the heart was beating when those projectiles made the defects to it?
No.
No, it wasn't beating, or no, you don't have an opinion?
No, it wasn't beating.
Okay. Going on to the foreign material. Are these items you've pointed out previously?
Yes.
Okay. What are we looking at in this photo? Hold on, let me turn it for the... You could explain what this is?
This is showing the brain and the extensive subarachnoid hemorrhage it has, and the lacerations that you can see to the right side of the cerebellum, which controls your balance, and also to the pons and the medulla and the midbrain.
So in terms of where we're looking right now, can you give me an orientation? Is this top, bottom?
This is the bottom side of the brain.
Okay. And for the head that you have in front of you, the styrofoam, could you show where on that how that would be oriented and put in the same position.
So,
Does counsel and the assistant state attorney and jury understand it's in the back? Is that right, Gary? Yes, sir. You all set, ready to go, counsel?
What's the temperature?
Yes, sir.
What's the temperature?
Is there any objections on those photographs?
No objections.
I want the record to reflect that the temperature in here is 61.1 degrees, which is
Lovely.
for who? Eskimos?
You might have to take somebody into custody here if they get too close.
Please. Please. And I will,
It's colder back
on a regular basis, inform the court of the temperature and the work conditions we're going through.
Work conditions, you're not employed by the state of Florida here, so it's not, you don't get any kind of workman's comp here, guys.
Well, we'll discuss that at a later date.
All right, we're all set. Let's bring the jury in.
Did we ever see that item 50?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendant, Mr. Dennis, his counsel, the assistant state attorney, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I trust you had a good evening and ready for the day. We're here again on the state's case in chief. So I think you completed the testimony of your last witness. Who's the next witness?
Christopher Williams.
Christopher Williams, please. You are Christopher Williams?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
This is our witness stand. When you come on in, just remain standing for a bit. Raise your right hand and be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you should give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your full legal name for the record.
Christopher Williams,
Please spell your first and last name for the record.
CHRISTOPHERWILLIAMS.
Thank you so much.
Please have a seat. Mr. Williams, have a microphone in front of you. You'll adjust up or down, just move back and forth. All right? Ready to proceed?
Yes, sir.
Counsel, you may.
Thank you. Good morning. Detective, how are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Very well. Thank you for asking. Could you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and tell them where you work?
I am now Sergeant Christopher Williams. I work for the Broward County Sheriff's Office.
Congratulations on your promotion. My apologies, Sergeant.
Thank you.
So, Sergeant, could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what your current assignment is with the Broward Sheriff's Office?
I'm currently a sergeant assigned to the Road Patrol Division in the Pompano Beach District.
And how long have you been there?
1 month.
In terms of prior to going and becoming a sergeant on that promotion, what did you do for the Sheriff's Office?
Previous to that, I worked in the crime scene unit of the Sheriff's Office for 11 years.
When you worked in the crime scene unit, were you a sworn law enforcement officer?
Yes.
What were some of your job responsibilities and tasks as a crime scene detective?
So crime scene detective for the Broward Sheriff's Office, most of us are all sworn. We have 12 sworn law enforcement officers in there, 3 civilians. We respond to major crime scenes, rape, murder, homicide, suicide, suspicious death, police-involved shootings, and robberies with a crime scene and a victim. We also respond to shootings that happen with a victim as well, and we investigate. Those are the only things that we investigate. Anything less would be investigated by the victim.
Okay, so Sergeant, you mentioned that you work for the Broward Sheriff's Office. What jurisdictional boundaries do you do work for the Broward Sheriff's Office?
We have the entire county of Broward.
Do you assist other agencies on occasion?
We do. So we have naturally there's I believe 27 municipalities in the county of Broward. The sheriff has 17 contracts for police services for those for 17 of them, and there's some smaller municipalities that we have what's called an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with Lighthouse Point, Hillsborough Mile, Hillsborough Beach, the smaller agencies who don't necessarily have as much crime, but when they do, the crime scene unit for the sheriff's office will go and assist them with it. On top of that, we will assist other agencies such as Hallandale Beach. We have an MOU with them currently right now to investigate their homicides. We also will assist other agencies at the request of that agency or at the request of the state attorney's office.
So with regards to the 11 years in crime scene as a detective, what did you do before that for the sheriff's office?
Prior to that, I worked on road patrol in the city of Deerfield Beach. And prior to that, I worked in the jail for 2 years.
So in terms of your entire time at the sheriff's office, how many years do you have in?
I'm getting ready to start number 20.
Okay. Going on to specifically your training and experience in the crime scene unit. Do you take specialized training when you are brought into the crime scene unit as a detective?
Yes, so for the Broward Sheriff's Office, we start off our brand new detectives with 1,000 hours, which equals about 1 year of on-the-job training. We also have them attend multiple classes, medical examiner, death investigation classes, shooting classes, and bloodstain classes, and footwear and tire wear examination classes. And we also are all registered with the IAI, which is called the International Association of Identification. And we make sure that we're all certified within that unit.
So in terms of maintaining the IAI, or International Association of Identification certification, what's required?
So there's actually a very long, there's a test that goes with that, and lots of studying. We need to know a lot of forensic work, how to use a camera properly, which is probably the most challenging part of the class, because naturally we need to capture the scene, and a lot of times the scenes are at night, so the nighttime photography becomes the challenge for most of our detectives as they come into our unit. So we have to be proficient in photography, proficient in investigations, make sure that a suicide is really a suicide and not a homicide, or a hanging is really a hanging. So we're all taught how to investigate these things and recognize the differences between what is presented to us versus what it really is.
Okay, so I'm going to go back. You mentioned you'd spent a number of years on
good,
road
Shay.
patrol as well before becoming a crime scene detective. While you were on road patrol, did you have to deal with traffic crash reconstruction?
Yes. So in road patrol, I was fortunate enough, like I said, to work in the city of Deerfield Beach. They're a very good city for the sheriff's office. They support the deputies very well. Each city has what's called LETF funds, which is law enforcement trust funds. It's money seized from drug forfeitures, drug money, drug cars, stuff like that. And the city actually sets aside $25,000 a year at that time to send deputies to schools. I opted to take them up on that offer and attended multiple advanced traffic homicide investigation classes, basic traffic homicide investigation classes, traffic crash reconstruction classes at that expense, which I was very fortunate to do.
So after you took some of these traffic crash reconstruction classes, approximately how many of those reconstructions did you do while working on road patrol?
A lot. Probably every single crash that I investigated, I treated it with I applied the training that I obtained just to maintain my proficiency in the training that I had on it. So whether it was a basic crash or a 5-car crash, it was all treated with the training that I had obtained.
Would that be more than 100 times you had the opportunity to use that training as a road patrol deputy?
Yes.
In terms of the actual reconstruction of a traffic crash, what types of principles are you relying upon when you're doing a recreation?
It is math. Essentially what it boils down to is math. So you're obtaining measurements, and so for instance, on a traffic crash, you skid, you hit a car, and you come to a stop. So that you have measurements of the skid marks to obtain a speed. You have measurements of the crush damage from each vehicle, and you also have what's called coefficient of friction, which is the gripping, if you will, of the road. So all of that requires trig, and it all gets put into a very long math equation to actually calculate the speed that the person was going when they crashed into the other car or wall or tree, whatever they crashed into. And the same things are applied if they don't skid. So if they don't skid and they crash right into a tree without even touching the brakes, that crush damage also gets applied to determine their speed.
So, Detective, it sounds like you use a lot of that high school trigonometry and geometry that we learned.
Yes.
It's been a while, so I'm going to have to ask you to go slow on some of that, if you don't mind, okay?
Okay.
With regards to shooting reconstruction, how does the traffic crash reconstruction help and make you a better shooting reconstructionist?
So it's the same principles that of math that are applied in the traffic crash reconstruction that would be applied in shooting reconstruction.
So going into specifically shooting reconstruction courses, have you taken a number of those while working as a crime scene detective?
I have.
And can you talk about the number of ones that you've taken?
I've taken West Virginia State University shooting reconstruction class and a shooting reconstruction class with the University of North Florida, the Institute of Police Technology and Management.
And in terms of the number of hours in shooting reconstruction courses on those two that you just discussed, approximately how many?
Approximately 80 hours.
Additionally, have you taken the basic traffic homicide investigation course?
Yes.
And you talked about traffic crash reconstruction courses. Have you taken other ones of those while you've been a crime scene detective?
For traffic crash?
Yes.
No.
Do you take a class in terms of death investigations?
Yes.
And what is that?
So death investigations is to determine what you're looking at when you see a deceased body. So I always like to say the body's the biggest rat on the planet. It will, if you know what you're looking for, you'll be able to determine what happened.
So Sergeant, sorry, still getting used to that one. Sergeant, in terms of the time of arrival on scene, is crime scene there before the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
Okay. So when you are first looking and determining whether or not a death is suspicious, you're the first person looking at that body?
Correct.
So could you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that Principles of Death Investigation class taught you, briefly?
So it would teach us if we're dealing with an overdose, what to look for when we're dealing with an overdose. It would teach us if it's what to look for with, if there's gunshot wounds, what to look for if you have what looks to be nothing. You just have a body there and 23-year-old male who just died. Teaches us what to look for. So we're looking for petechia hemorrhaging, which you'll see in the eyes, which are little blood vessels that are throughout your whole entire body. And if they are squeezed, if you have a particular squeeze, you'll see petechia hemorrhaging in the eyes. You'll see it on the bottom of the eyelids. You also see it in the chest quite often. In an area where there's trauma of strangulation, you'll see lots of petechia hemorrhaging. So that's just some of what we're looking for when we're making our determination on what actually happened with this with the decedent.
During the death investigation course, does it give you a general idea of how to collect evidence on those cases?
Yes.
Do you also have training in specific crime scene investigations and collection of evidence?
Yes.
About how many hours?
Oh, that was 40 hours also.
Okay. And in terms of your day-to-day job when you are in crime scene, how much of your time was spent actually collecting, documenting, and preserving evidence?
So we are quite busy in Broward County. There's only 12 of us, and we have, like I said, 17 cities to serve, and our MOU cities. So roughly 1 or 2 a day.
So would that be half of your time?
Yes.
You talked a little bit about shooting reconstruction courses that you took. Can you tell ladies and gentlemen a little bit about what is an approach angle or an angle of entry?
An angle of entry would be from a projectile or a bullet into a target. So it's the flight path, if you will, as it's going in. That flight path would then once it makes its contact with its target, we would then be able to determine its angle of entry.
And is that similar to some of the things you do in the traffic crash reconstruction with approach angles of cars hitting one another?
Yes, so approach angles would also apply to traffic crash investigations. It's a little different. It's the same math, but essentially if you have a car that T-bones another car, one car is going 80 and the other car is going 40, what happens is due to physics and velocity, they end up switching speeds, and the 40-mile-an-hour car goes faster and the 80-mile-an-hour car goes slower. So those are part of approach angles, and that's how we would be able to determine pre-crash speed and post-crash speed. So a lot of times you'll see that you'll have a higher speed from the original and a lower speed from the original, and it throws people off sometimes.
So does this also help with the shooting reconstruction? You're using that same angle math?
Yes.
Have you taken classes in blood stain pattern analysis?
Yes.
Can you explain what that is first?
So blood is a unique liquid. It contains, it's unlike any liquid on the planet, so it has unique features when it is altered. So when it's outside of the body and contact is made with it, it will create a pattern. Or if you have, say, a knife and you stab it into somebody and you pull that knife out, the knife naturally will have blood on it, and that blood coming back on the knife, with the knife coming in the backwards position, will come off of the blade and it will make a stain. Or if you take blood and hit it with a hammer, it will make a different type of stain. So there's several types of stains that are associated with blood stain, and those all need to be interpreted to determine exactly what happened, and in some cases it can tell you where the assailant was.
Okay. In terms of blood stain pattern analysis, how long was that class that you took?
40 hours.
Do they have a discussion about what is blowback?
Yes.
What is that?
So blowback is very simple. The easiest way that I can explain it is, and everybody in this courtroom, this has happened to them, you have your garden hose with the big nozzle on it, and you're getting ready to wash the car, and you hit the rim, and what happens? The water comes right back at you and hits you in the face. The same thing would happen with blowback. So if you're in close vicinity with a firearm and you shoot somebody, depending on where you shoot them at on their body, the blood will come back in that same direction of the velocity that it came from. So if it came from me to you, if the bullet went from me to you, the blood is going to come from you to me. Same thing as the garden hose theory. It's a phenomenon that happens. It's all with Newton. Newton figured it all out, and he was very right, and you can't ever escape it.
So with regards to that, if you shoot a dead body, do you have the same blowback pattern?
No, you will not.
Why not?
So a dead body, it does not have any circulation. So there's no blood flowing through the body. Post-mortem, once you're dead, what happens is we get what's called rigor mortis, which is also called lividity. And what that is pooling of the blood. So if you die on your back, almost immediately the blood starts to pool all the way to your back. So all the blood will just kind of, gravity brings it all the way down to your back. Eventually it will become fixed and it will stay there. So if we roll you over, it will not go back in that other direction. If it's not yet fixed, we can flip the body over and the blood will then flow the other way again.
Is that something that would help determine an approximate time of death?
Yes, so lividity starts to kick in anywhere between 4 to 6 hours after death. It will become fixed approximately 18 hours after death. So generally when we come in contact with a body, we will check for lividity. And a lot of times, I could probably show on my hand, if you touch and then let go, you see that my hand was red because there's blood there, and then I push and it's white, but it then refills with blood. With lividity, that's called blanching. So it's not, when lividity blanches, that means that lividity is not fixed. Remember I told you that it will become permanent. So if we touch the lividity portion of a body and it doesn't blanch, then we know that the lividity is fixed and we know an approximate time of death.
In terms of the goal of a crime scene detective or reconstruction, what are you trying to work backwards to?
Can you restate that?
Sure. Do you know when you go there and see a body what happened before?
Not right away.
So what is your goal in any sort of crime scene reconstruction?
To read the crime scene. So I want to read what the crime scene is telling me. The crime scene is going to, it sounds corny, but it's going to talk to me. It's going to tell me what happened, where it happened. It's not going to necessarily tell me why. I'm not interested in why, but I am interested in what happened, where it happened, and what evidence was left behind due to the actions of what happened.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the crime scene photography you do as well and the crime scene reconstruction of a shooting incident. Do you also have training just in homicide investigation and advanced homicide investigations?
I do.
And what types of time frames and hours on those?
For homicide investigation was a 40-hour class, and advanced homicide investigation was another 40-hour class.
So Sergeant Williams, with regards to your on-the-job experience, do you have training and experience putting those skills that you learned into practice?
Yes.
Approximately how many death investigations did you go to during your 11 years in crime scene?
Approximately 800.
In terms of, as a crime scene traffic homicide crash, did you go to incidents in which the vehicle was the weapon?
Yes.
And how many times was that an issue?
Twice.
And in terms of the shooting reconstructions, how many times have you had the opportunity to use those skills in practice?
So those skills and practices, I would say well over 100. Any time that a shooting reconstruction can be done, it will be done. And it's important. Our job in crime scene is to figure out what happened, corroborate stories, and if the evidence is going to corroborate somebody's story. So it's that's, if it can be reconstructed, then naturally we're going to reconstruct it.
And in terms of prior opportunities to testify in court as a shooting reconstruction expert, have you done it?
Yes.
Approximately how many times?
2 other times.
And in what jurisdiction was that?
Here in Broward County.
Going in terms of when you're doing these shooting reconstructions, what are your first step in this process?
The first step is, so if in a car, in a house, or just in general?
Yes.
Okay. So the first step obviously is to say we have a house. First step is to process our scene and collect as much evidence as we can before we do any type of reconstruction. So we want to document as much as possible, collect as much as possible, because low cards theory for crime scene is you introduce something to a crime scene every time you enter, and you take something away from a crime scene every time you exit. So therefore we want to maintain low card and stay in, document, collect, process the scene before we do any type of reconstruction.
So, Sergeant, is a shooting reconstruction an absolute fact of what happened or a reasonable explanation?
It's a reasonable explanation.
Why is that?
Because I wasn't there. I wasn't there to witness it. I wasn't there to stop it. So there's no way for me to be absolute. I can be pretty close though.
Okay, so talking, you said, on low card and not introducing anything new to the crime scene. What types of measures do you take to make sure you don't leave any evidence of your entry into the crime scene behind?
So we'll generally don tie-back suits which if you've ever watched Forensic Files or anything, you see us in the goofy Smurf suits, gloves, masks, eyewear. And the whole purpose of that is we don't want our hair in there. We don't want our DNA in there. We don't want our fingerprints in there. And our sweat. We want to try to gather as much evidence from us and contain it in the Smurf suit.
Okay, in terms of, you said you weren't there. Can you ever state with 100% certainty, absent a video, how a firearm was being held?
No.
Can you ever say with 100% certainty exactly how many feet a shooter was away from a moving target?
A standard or a standing shooter to a moving target?
Yes.
No.
What about the opposite? You have a moving shooter and a stationary target.
No.
Why not?
Because, excuse me, I'm sorry.
If you need water or anything, please let me know.
So the movement of these items is going to create false distances because the target has the receiving end of the bullet, the projectile, has moved. So if the receiving end of the projectile is stationary, then we can do a complete reconstruction.
So if there's movement involved, that complicates it.
Yes.
Are you trying to make and determine locations potentially to look for evidence?
I'm sorry?
In doing a shooting reconstruction, are you trying to look for areas in which evidence might be collected?
I would, if I'm doing a reconstruction for one of my scenes, I would have all the evidence collected prior to that. If it's in a car, sometimes if I can't find a projectile, when I begin my reconstruction, my trajectory rod will generally lead me to a projectile. And when it does, then we come to a grinding halt, grab the camera, photograph what we found, and collect what we found, and then continue on with our reconstruction.
So, Sergeant Williams, to explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you have one projectile mark in the wall behind you, and you're trying to figure out where in this courtroom you would look for casings or surveillance footage, is that something shooting reconstruction would help with?
It would help with. It would definitely help. But we could also, if it perforated the wall, then we can do a reconstruction. And perforation is all the way through. Penetration, it goes in and it stays.
And in terms of, so we're clear on that, can you do a reconstruction on a penetrating gunshot defect?
No.
What about a perforating one?
Perforating, yes.
What?
Because we have a second hole. So if we only have one hole, the projectile did not complete its flight path because it was stopped. So because it did not complete the flight path, I cannot tell you the angle or the trajectory that it came in at. But if it perforates it and creates an additional hole, now it has completed a flight path. Even if it goes into a third or fourth target, the initial first and second hole is that actual flight path or trajectory of that projectile.
And in terms of, you talked about like secondary targets, intervening targets, is that something you've done training and experience in looking at when you're doing a shooting reconstruction?
Yes.
For example, glass. Does that have specific properties that you would look for deflection?
So glass, so tempered glass, which is what is in every vehicle, mainly because if you're driving down the road and so a rock comes off a truck and it hits your windshield, you don't want it to shard and stab you in the eye as you're driving down the road. So all of the glass inside an automobile is tempered glass, which means that it goes into little tiny pieces. It also has a piece of plastic or clear plastic in the middle. It's actually two pieces of glass with a piece of plastic in the middle, which keeps it intact. But the tempered glass will create some type of movement to a projectile. Generally, it will cause, depending on the spin of the projectile, so as some barrels of a gun are going to rotate the projectile to the right, and some will rotate it to the left, and some will not rotate it at all. Generally, they're all rotated to the right, so when the projectile enters into the tempered glass, the projectile will tend to go to the right. It won't necessarily alter the trajectory, it's just turning it.
Okay, so this is things that have been documented and studied in the field of shooting reconstruction.
Yes.
In terms of other materials, sheet metal, wood, are these other items that you would look at and determine whether they were involved before you go forth and render an opinion on a shooting reconstruction?
Yes.
So going back into, I want to make sure it's clear, how does the discipline of shooting reconstruction differ from firearms and tool marks?
So firearms and tool marks deals with the identification of the internal workings of a firearm and the cartridge cases of the that come out of the firearm and the projectiles that come out of the firearm. They deal with that part, where I will deal with the ballistics part of it, of shooting reconstruction.
So when you say ballistics, do you mean inside the gun or outside the gun?
Outside of the gun.
In terms of, can you define what is a terminal ballistics?
Terminal ballistics is the projectile has stopped, and where it stopped is considered terminal.
In terms of this specific case, did you make any promises as to the outcome of your investigation before it started?
No.
What did you say when you were contacted to look at this case?
I said that I'll take a look at it and we'll see what I come up with.
And do you have any sort of fixed determination when you look at any shooting reconstruction?
No.
Do you recall at what point you were first contacted to assist in this case?
I believe it was November of 2020.
Okay. With regards to that, who contacted you?
You, ma'am.
Okay. What were you asked to look at and analyze in this case?
I was asked to determine if this shooting incident was a drive-by shooting.
So, if there was any other forensic testing that could be done, did you suggest that as well?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
If you could just briefly, were you asked to consult at all with regards to cell phones?
No.
Any sort of location data or anything with regards to the location of an individual?
Location data, no. Okay. Location of an individual, yes.
And that's within the car?
Correct.
Okay. In terms of, were you asked to consult on any sort of the medical examiner's office findings?
Their findings, their findings are final, but I needed their photographs and their measurements that they conducted. So I did reach out to obtain their reports and their photographs.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the physical evidence that you reviewed. Did you review the car in question in this case?
Yes.
Where was that car being held and stored?
That car was being held at the Broward Sheriff's Office confiscation warehouse.
And if you could explain briefly to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what warehouse looks like on the inside.
It is basically a gigantic warehouse that stores cars that are involved in crime.
In terms of, in this warehouse, are the cars sealed individually in each location?
Yes.
What types of materials are used to prevent cross-contamination from the various cars?
All of the cars are closed. They are sealed with red evidence tape. If windows are missing, plastic goes over them so that nothing can get into the car. The plastic would assume the role of windows so that nothing can get inside.
Okay. In terms of the security of that building, is anyone allowed to come and go into that building?
Absolutely not.
When you are doing an analysis of this Jeep, this car in this case, how do you do that?
So in this case, I actually had that the vehicle in question towed from the confiscation warehouse to the crime scene unit, which has a forensic processing garage. And from there, I began my investigation on the vehicle.
The forensic processing garage, where is that located?
What floor are we on? Fourth?
Fourth.
4 floors down.
And can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how the forensic processing garage is outfitted?
So it's outfitted, actually has a car lift in it so that we can lift the car in the air, look underneath, see if there's anything in there. There's a plasma cutter in there. There's torches in there. Every tool that you can think of that you would find in a mechanic shop plus more is available in that garage.
Okay. In terms of you mentioned you reviewed some of the medical examiner's information and photographs. What other things did you review in this case?
I reviewed the crime scene photos that were taken by the Miramar Police Department.
And those were provided to you and the medical examiner's office. Any other photos or any other documentation that you reviewed from the Miramar Police Department?
I reviewed the crime scene unit report from Mr. Kelly.
With regards to the trajectory analysis that was done by the Miramar Police Department, did you review those photographs?
Yes.
Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what was the issue with the string.
So the Miramar Police Department used string with a putty, and they attached the string to the beginning of the projectile hole on the back of the seat of this vehicle. And then they took that string and they brought it back to a big ruler. However, the string...
Sergeant, let me interrupt you for just a second. With regards to their attempt to recreate the back glass, what was the purpose of that?
I believe, to determine some type of trajectory.
Is that something that would be useful in this case?
The trajectory would be useful, yes.
But what about trying to recreate that back windshield and the heights that a specific projectile would have gone in?
Yes.
And with the going forward, you were mentioning talking about the strings. Were they taut in a straight line?
No, the strings actually were sagging, which can cause inaccurate readings.
So in terms of that was the specific issue you took with their trajectory analysis?
Correct.
In terms of the trajectory rods that were placed through the car by the Miramar Police Department, were there any issues or concerns that you could see from the photographs?
Not with the rods.
So in terms of the data that you relied upon, the physical car, how did you process that?
So I actually, once the car got into our garage, I photographed it in place, and then I put on my smurf suit, and I actually sat in the car.
Okay, in terms of, you said you photographed it. Prior to coming into court today, did you have an opportunity to review the photographs that you took in this case?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to show you what's been previously shown to defense counsel and marked for identification as states quadruple D. Detective Williams, do you recognize this flash drive?
Yes.
How do you recognize that flash drive?
Those are my initials and ID.
Did you have the opportunity to look at the photos on the drive before you came to court?
Yes.
Do they fairly and accurately depict your involvement and role in this investigation?
Yes, they do.
Here at this time, state would request to move state quadruple D in as state 77.
Any objection?
No objection in principle. I just need to know the date that was relates to.
All of them.
The date.
All the dates. All the photos are on one listing.
Okay. All right, no objection.
It'll be admitted.
States quadruple D will be marked as 877.
Okay. So, Detective, I'm going to start with publishing these, and you took a number of photographs.
Yes.
So I want to start and do them in order by time. So I'm going to start here. You mentioned the blue Smurf suit, so I'm going to start with what's been labeled as CSW 6747. Is this the Smurf suit you were talking about?
Yes.
And is that you in that photograph?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I won't tell him you said that. So I want to go forward here to 6762. Can you describe for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what we're looking at in this photo?
So this is inside our processing garage. This is the vehicle in question, and these are trajectory rods that have been inserted into the vehicle to terminal points.
What is the purpose of putting in these trajectory rods and photographing them?
The purpose of putting them in is, number one, to create a trajectory. Number two, the picture is for demonstrative purposes to show where the projectiles, how the projectiles entered into the vehicle. They don't necessarily, just where the ends of the projectiles are, do not necessarily reflect where a shooter was standing. However, they just reflect where the trajectory or the angle into the vehicle is.
Okay, so we talked about angles, so I want to make sure that we can understand that. Are you taking angle measurements from these trajectory rods?
So what I'm doing is I'm creating a right triangle with geometry with these trajectory rods in order to obtain an angle. Some people will use a protractor to do that. However,
Wait, it's been a while since geometry. Explain what a protractor is, please.
so the protractor is always flat on one end and it has a half moon on the other. May I stand?
Please, if you would, yes.
So if you use a protractor, and obviously a vehicle is angled, it's aerodynamic, so some of it comes out like this, some cars like that. If you use a protractor, and obviously a protractor has to be flat, you're going to get an incorrect angle. So I use geometry to create a right triangle, which would then give me the actual angle of each sight mark.
So, Sergeant, are you telling me that you use the Pythagorean theorem in your day-to-day work?
Yes.
I think I owe an apology to my high school geometry. Okay, so talking about that, is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared?
Yes.
And what does that tell you?
That tells me an angle. So obviously you have,
She trying to be a
it has to
little
equal
more
180
humorous
degrees.
today. You never know.
We start off always at 90, and then we would work our way to determining that angle.
Are you looking at more than one angle on each of these particular entrance defects?
There are different angles for each site mark.
Are you looking at the vertical angle?
These are all going to be horizontal angles.
Okay. And when you say we're using
vertical angles, yes.
And so we're using a poster board and a knitting needle help demonstrate the different types of angles that you're measuring on that.
A knitting angle? Needle?
That's what I had.
Okay, yeah, that'll work.
Okay. Here, let's say it would be using a demonstrative exhibit here.
Thank you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness is using a demonstrative exhibit to assist in explaining and illustrating his testimony. The evidence is the testimony of the witness. The demonstratives, unless they are later received in evidence, are not in evidence and do not go back to the jury room during your deliberations.
Okay, so showing counsel it's been marked as A, B, and C. If you need to move on.
You're going to be facing it.
Facing out. So starting with what this demonstrative is on strike mark A. If you to illustrate, would you show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you would insert a trajectory rod if you were trying to do the trajectory of strike mark A, and we're going to hold it at a 90-degree angle.
So naturally, just to put a disclaimer here, this is only one hole. So I would need a second hole to complete this. However, you would start with the inserting the trajectory rod, and you would follow. You don't just shove it in. You actually gently follow the flight path of the projectile until it reaches terminal, and then you stop.
So if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you're looking at the vertical angle, what part of it are you measuring?
So I would measure from the ground to the actual strike mark. That would be a measurement that I would need. The ground to the tip of the rod, and then the length of the rod that is sticking out from the projectile hole. That all gets put into fancy math, and it produces an angle.
And so the angle that you are measuring, if you could just show with your finger what angle you're trying to figure out.
Trying to get the trajectory angle, the flight path of the projectile.
So is that side to side or top to bottom?
That's going to be from top to bottom.
Okay. So that on strike mark A, does this illustrate a practically 90 degree?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to strike mark B here. Would you use the same math on this particular type of trajectory entrance or exit?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you're talking about the vertical angle here, what area are you looking at and measuring?
The same one. So we'll go from the ground to the strike mark, the ground to the tip of the rod, and then from the strike mark entry to the end of the rod for the length of the rod.
And in terms of the side-to-side angle, or azimuth as it's sometimes referred to, is this again at a 90 degrees to the side of this piece of poster board?
Yes.
Moving on to strike mark C. How would you do the same trajectory analysis on strike mark C?
Strike mark C would be very similar with we would want to know the entrance or the ground to the strike mark, the ground to the tip of the rod, but then we would have to get a horizontal distance and use the I'm trying to remember offhand. The side of the wall to the tip of the rod.
So you're then getting the azimuth or the entry angle on
Correct.
side to side.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of the math and everything else, you're making the same right triangle every time.
Yes.
Okay. So, what you're doing with these trajectory rods, is this repeatable?
Yes.
Can someone come back and check your work?
Yes.
In terms of the projectiles in this case, what was your goal when you start doing these trajectory rods?
The goal was the request, which was to determine if this was a drive-by shooting.
Okay. With the perforations or defects in the car, are you matching them up with any and all recovered projectiles?
Yes.
So I want to go, and in terms of, you mentioned that there was, if you found a projectile or you thought there should be a projectile somewhere, you would stop and look for it.
Yes.
Can you explain if that happened in this case?
It did.
Okay, and so I want to go forward and go to some of your photos from the recovery of projectiles. Did you recover projectiles in this case?
2 projectiles were recovered from this vehicle.
And where were they recovered from?
The first projectile was recovered from underneath the back seat.
Okay.
And the second projectile was recovered on the passenger side interior B pillar.
Okay, so I'm going to go forward and show the jury what's been labeled as CSW_677. What are we looking at here in this photo?
May I stand?
Please. And there's actually a red rod right next to you that if you want to point with that.
Right here is a projectile. Right here. That was recovered from the seat. So the seat was actually lifted up and that projectile was recovered from underneath the seat.
And so when you're saying underneath the seat, what seat are you talking about?
The back seat.
Did you have to remove the seat to get to that projectile?
I did.
Okay, and in CSW6778, is that another view of that same projectile?
Correct.
So you mentioned there was an additional projectile recovered from this car, and you said the B pillar?
The passenger side B pillar interior.
And so if you could orient the ladies and gentlemen of the jury in what we're looking at in photo CSW6772, what area of the car are we looking at?
This is the passenger side interior B pillar.
Okay, and so if you could explain where the front seat passenger would be in relation to this photo. Great.
Can you blow it up?
Sure.
Oh, I
Actually,
guess
Detective,
not.
or
Okay.
Sergeant, sorry, I think council needs to approach.
We need a short recess, ladies and gentlemen. Do not discuss the case, don't form any opinion about the case, don't allow anyone to discuss the case in present. Sort of no research. This meeting is okay.
Well. It's pretty important testimony because now you have another. I ain't gonna lie. When they showed them pictures, where they look like the shots came from, y'all.
Thank you. Let the record reflect the jury stepped out. Councilman Manwell with defendant. Mr. Devin, need a restroom break?
Did it look like it came from the back seat? Where they had the guy sitting in the front with the little blue outfit? Looked like it came from the back seat. I mean, I don't know if that was the actual evidence. Cool Breeze, what's good with it?
Hello!
Hey, fam. That's what I'm saying. Like, now, to me, I'm going to be honest with you. Now I'm just feeling like people just trying to make this into a case.
I would have all the evidence collected prior to that. If it's in a car, sometimes I can't find a projectile. When I begin my reconstruction, my trajectory rod will generally lead me to a projectile. And when it does, then we come to a grinding halt, grab the camera, photograph what we found, and collect what we found, and then continue on with our reconstruction.
So, Sergeant Williams, to explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you have one projectile mark in the wall behind you, and you're trying to figure out where in this courtroom you would look for casings or surveillance footage, is that something shooting reconstruction would help with?
It would help with. It would definitely help. But we could also, if it perforated the wall, then we can do a reconstruction. And perforation is all the way through. Penetration, it goes in and it stays.
And in terms of, so we're clear on that, can you do a reconstruction on a penetrating gunshot defect?
No.
What about a perforating one?
Perforating, yes.
Why?
Because we have a second hole. So if we only have one hole, the projectile did not complete its flight path because it was stopped. So because it did not complete the flight path, I cannot tell you the angle or the trajectory that it came in at. But if it perforates it and creates an additional hole, now it has completed a flight path. Even if it goes into a third or fourth target, the initial first and second hole is that actual flight path or trajectory.
Hey, some of these comments is crazy. There's people saying, man, he shot up the wrong side of the car. They said when he staged it, he's so goofy, he shot the wrong side of the car. Like, this shit, you can't make this shit up, yo. You cannot make this shit is real life. You cannot make this stuff up. I promise you can't. So oh my goodness gracious, man. It ain't funny, man, because this was it ain't funny because it's real. It's real life, yo. This is real. Let's take this serious.
Sit intact. But the tempered glass will create some type of movement to a projectile. Generally, it will cause, depending on the spin of the projectile, so as some barrels of a gun are going to rotate the projectile to the right, and some will rotate it to the left, and some will not rotate it at all. Generally, they're all rotated to the right, so when the projectile enters into the tempered glass, the projectile will tend to go to the right. It won't necessarily alter the trajectory, it's just turning it.
Okay, so this is things that have been documented and studied in the field of shooting reconstruction.
Yes.
In terms of other materials, sheet metal, wood, or these other items that you would look at and determine whether they were involved before you go forth and render an opinion on a shooting reconstruction?
Yes.
So going back into, I want to make sure it's clear, how does the discipline of shooting reconstruction differ from firearms and tool marks?
So firearms and tool marks deals with the identification of the internal workings of a firearm and the cartridge cases of the that come out of the firearm and the projectiles that come out of the firearm. They deal with that part, where I will deal with the ballistics part of it, of shooting reconstruction.
So when you say ballistics, do you mean inside the gun or outside the gun?
Outside of the gun.
In terms of, can you define what is a terminal ballistics?
Terminal ballistics is the projectile has stopped, and where it stopped is considered terminal.
In terms of this specific case, did you make any promises as to the outcome of your investigation before it started?
No.
What did you say when you were contacted to look at this case?
I said that I'll take a look at it and we'll see what I come up with.
And do you have any sort of fixed determination when you look at any shooting reconstruction?
No.
Do you recall at what point you were first contacted to assist in this case?
I believe it was November of 2020.
Okay. With regards to that, who contacted you?
You, ma'am.
Okay. What were you asked to look at and analyze in this case?
I was asked to determine if this shooting incident was a drive-by shooting.
So, if there was any other forensic testing that could be done, would you suggest that as well?
Yes.
Did you do that in this case?
Yes.
If you could just briefly, were you asked to consult at all with regards to cell phones?
No.
Any sort of location data or anything with regards to the location of an individual?
Location data, no.
Okay.
Location of an individual, yes.
And that's within the car?
Correct.
Okay. In terms of, were you asked to consult on any sort of the medical examiner's office findings?
Their findings, their findings are final, but I needed their photographs and their measurements that they conducted. So I did reach out to obtain their reports and their photographs.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the physical evidence that you reviewed. Did you review the car in question in this case?
Yes.
Where was that car?
Yeah, we have to go back to basics here, Robin. The idea of how law enforcement realized this wasn't a drive-by shooting, but was actually shooting from the inside. It's curious to see if the defense will try to show that more and say, well, are you sure that it's not a drive-by shooting? Are you sure my client's story wasn't accurate? You think they're going to explore that a little bit?
Yeah, Jesse, I think you're hitting the nail right on the head here. I think the defense is going to come back strong. This forensics expert is coming across, very confident that he is almost like a horse whisperer when it comes to crime scenes, and he's going to read the room and be able to tell exactly what has happened and has occurred, even though he wasn't even there. I think that confidence could, catch him off guard. I mean, experts are typically people that you don't want to tango with too much, but in this particular case, I think the defense is going to do everything they can to rebut this.
Well, sometimes these attorneys become experts themselves because they have to know the material backwards and forwards, and they catch experts off the guard. But I actually wanted to ask you, Rich, about the motive in this case, because that was something that was the big theme from the prosecution this past week, was that the defendant was part of this gang, and maybe as a way to show his oath, he killed his friends. We know that could also come into play. This is a death penalty case. Maybe it's one of the aggravating factors. I don't know if the jury's sold on the motive. I don't know if I'm sold on the motive. What do you think about it?
So we say all the time, motive is not necessary. You don't need to prove a motive to prove somebody guilty of murder, but it helps. And some jurors, I think, almost find it necessary. They want to understand, especially in a case like this. These were friends of his. They were traveling together. Why would he all of a sudden turn on them and kill them out of nowhere? So it's sort of a necessary, unnecessary part of the case. And I think it was helpful that the prosecution has something of a theory, because prior to this week, I hadn't really heard anything about what the motive was. But Still not that strong a theory, I don't think.
The reason I'm asking is because then the jury has to accept that he did this and staged it as a drive-by shooting. That takes planning, that takes effort, that's very specific, you know what I mean? And I don't know if that's a lot for the jury to accept, but then again, we've seen people create all kinds of elaborate schemes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is really going to be a stretch of the imagination that someone would murder their childhood friends in a staged drive-by who is a successful rapper on the top of his career, someone who can barely respond to text messages as they purport, but have the time and the wherewithal to kind of plan this elaborate drive-by instead of just having one of his goons or other person take him out.
Now let's be clear. There is evidence that was put forward by the prosecution to signify that.
Hey, I get a feeling that some of these commentators, like, they have their mindset already. Because if it was a drive-by, like, it's like they ignoring the medical examiner, who the defense didn't even challenge the fact that the 2 fatal shots, they agreed, or at least didn't dispute, that the fatal shots were in agreement with the medical examiner's findings. Second, you have this man, and look, you can see if the bullet is in the projectile is in the back seat. One of the victims was in the front seat. I mean, look. It's like they doing this for theatrics, because, I mean, if you really can't figure out that this wasn't a drive-by, and, like, I don't know what more they have to prove, to be honest, other than it wasn't a drive-by, because that is his claim.
Mr. Devins is responsible, particularly that, I think it was that Instagram post or that social media post where he basically takes ownership over what happened to these 2 people. And then, of course, I'm very curious to see what this testimony will lead to. So let's take a break. When we come back, we will jump live in court. Stay with us.
So now they want to go to break after I was already talking. Well, I got all kinds of stuff popping up on my phone. I don't know, y'all. I saw some of the polls. I'm going to check back on some of these polls in a minute. Some of the polls dropped 69% now. 78 last week. 69%. We're going to see how that play out.
Re-entering. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Please be seated. Let the record once again reflect the presence of the defendant, his counsel, the assistant state attorney, and ladies and gentlemen, the jury. Our witness, Sergeant Williams, remains on stand. If you're ready to proceed with your direct counsel, you may.
Thank you. Okay, Sergeant, so I'm going through some of the photos, and here we have the first photo that you took in this case. What were you documenting?
This is documenting the vehicle as it initially came to me, with the plastic wrap around the window that was broken out, and showing the tag as well.
Okay, and is this the vehicle that you did the analysis on?
Yes,
And what tag from the state of Florida was assigned?
that is the tag IEKD22.
Excuse me, could we get the date? I did not recall the date when this was done.
Sure, no problem. Sergeant, were these photos from the initial evaluation of the Jeep?
December 17th, 2021.
And so based on that, when was the initial date you were contacted by myself to review this?
November 16, 2021.
Okay. So if there's anything you need to refer to your report, just let us know so you can refresh your recollection.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you said December 17th, 2021, sorry.
Yes,
Okay, and did you document the evidence tape and the seals on this car?
I did.
Going on to the side view of the vehicle, what are we looking at here?
This is the side of the vehicle that has defects in it, and
I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Are these letters things you put on there?
these letters were placed by the Miramar Police Department.
When you continued with your trajectory and shooting reconstruction, did you maintain the same letters when referring to the various defects?
I assumed these letters.
Okay. And so if we can just describe for the record the locations of each of these letters on this vehicle, starting with I.
Yeah,
I
it's the
would
same
be
truck.
in the passenger side rear door panel, exterior panel.
Okay. J,
Same,
K,
same,
L,
same,
M.
same.
Okay, moving on to N, O, and P.
These projectiles site marks are on the passenger side front door exterior.
And again, in this next photo, what are you
Nah, it's
documenting?
the same one. from
These
the
are
video
the
that they showed
seals.
early in the trial.
So going around to the seals have now been broken, what are you documenting in this photo?
This would be the driver's side rear door that is ajar, with a photograph showing the door ajar and the compartment area of that passenger side.
Okay. So in continuing, down here in the floor, there's another object with a blue piece of foam in it. What is that?
That would be the glove box of the vehicle.
Why is the glove box in the back seat?
The glove box had to be removed to remove the infotainment center of the vehicle.
And in terms of on the far side door, that doesn't look like the inside of any car door I've seen. Why is there pieces of it missing?
Can you zoom?
Sure. So all the black plastic's been removed? from
Correct.
the passenger
So that was removed for a footwear examination that was done on the vehicle.
There's some gray substance here. Can you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what happens to blood after it sits for 5 years?
Blood begins to break down after time, and actually it has bacteria, or if you will, as organisms that begin to break it down. DNA is in there, obviously, so it actually begins to eat itself, if you will, and that's essentially what is left behind.
And so going forward now through the photographs, I want to get to some of the ones with the individuals in the Tyvek Smurf suits. Starting here on 4851, what are you documenting in this particular image?
This is a photograph of the rear compartment or the back seat of the Jeep Compass, and it has a tape measure in it, and it's documenting the inside width of the vehicle.
Okay. And what was the inside width at shoulder height of the vehicle?
51 inches.
Why do you measure and document all of these measurements on the Jeep?
Well, this is a unique case because you have a shooting incident that occurred inside a vehicle.
Subscribe to my YouTube real quick.
And because it did, we can use these measurements to determine particular investigative leads, such as where a shooter could be and a distance of the end of the barrel of the firearm. So because it's a compartmentalized area, unlike being out in the open field where we have so many variables, the variables are severely limited because it's inside a compartmentalized area.
And so we'll get into why you can make that determination in just a little bit. I want to start in terms of the angles of impact for each of the strike marks on the outside of the car and on the back of the rear passenger seats. Did you do the angles of impact on each of those?
Yes.
Okay. So after the measurements in terms of the seats as well, here, what are you documenting in this photo, CSW 4855?
That would be the distance from the back seat back, if you will, where you put your back, to the back of the front seat.
And what was that distance determined to be?
39 inches.
And what are you showing in this photo?
That would be the other end of the tape measure.
So I want to go here on the ceiling, S1 with the arrow pointed to a cutout. Was that also related to a patent or a footwear impression?
Yes, so that cutout, prior to that cutout in the headliner, there was a footwear impression on the headliner that was examined.
Okay, in terms of this measurement here, what are you showing the distance from?
Showing the distance from the passenger, from the driver's side, rear passenger seat back to the passenger front seat, front of the
Is that the headrest?
Headrest, yeah.
Okay. And then do you determine that measurement as well to the bottom of the seat?
Yes.
Okay. And what was that measurement?
39 inches.
And on the previous measurement, it was a similar?
39 inches.
So in terms of going forward in the reconstruction process, once you have put in all the trajectory rods and gotten the angles, what's the next step that you need to do?
From here, I continued my analysis of the vehicle. Because of the fact that I found the 2 projectiles, I wanted to ensure that anything else relevant to the investigation was collected, so I examined the vehicle further.
Okay, so I'm going to show defense counsel what's been marked as states quadruple E for identification purposes only. Do you recognize the exhibits in states quadruple E?
I do.
And how do you recognize those?
That is my handwriting and my name on it, and it is sealed with red evidence tape with my initials and ID.
Did you collect those items?
I did.
What are they?
These are 2 projectiles that were recovered from the vehicle.
And are those the 2 that we viewed previously in the photographs?
We've only reviewed 1 in the photograph.
Just the one in the back, and then the other one you mentioned was recovered from what location?
From the driver's side, or sorry, passenger side B pillar
And
interior.
Show in this photo that's up here, and you can touch the screen in front of you as well, and it will put a little arrow as to where is the passenger side B pillar. Okay. And are those projectiles in the same or substantially same condition as when you recovered them?
Can I open them?
Please. Scissors should be fine.
They are.
At this time, the state would request to move state quadruple E in as 78.
Any objection?
No.
It'll be admitted.
States quadruple E will be marked states number 78.
So you mentioned that you did some additional searching on the car once you realized that there was other projectiles in there. Did you
Correct.
find any other items of evidentiary value?
I did.
And what would that be?
I observed what appeared to be blowback on the headliner of the vehicle.
And so if you could explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where is the headliner on the vehicle?
It is above your head as you're seating in the car. It actually just is there for cosmetic purposes, so you don't see your roof.
So showing defense counsel what's been previously identified as state triple T. Sergeant, do you recognize state what's been marked for identification as state's triple T?
I do.
How do you recognize that item?
This is my handwriting, my name. It is sealed with red evidence tape with my initials and ID.
And what is that item?
This would be the headliner with the blowback on it that I cut out.
And do you recall on what date you cut that out?
That was cut out on December, may I just look over
Or does it
the
reflect on the packaging? in any
Oh
way?
yes, 12/17 of 21.
And is that in the same or substantially same condition as when you recovered it?
May I open it?
Please. Gloves there if you need them.
Yes, it is, minus the testing that I did, a cutting, and a cutting that the lab did.
Here at this time, the state would request to move states triple T in as state 79.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It will be admitted.
And Detective, if you'd be so kind, I'm going to ask you to publish this particular item to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
States triple T has been marked states 79.
You may.
And Detective, if you could hold it up and show the back of it as well, and then indicate which part went to the front of the vehicle.
Do you have the picture of the headliner?
Sure. Oh, sorry. Would this photo help in assisting you in the location?
And I object to the leading nature of
Will this assist you? Call the roll.
Yes.
Oh.
It would be so if the vehicle is facing this way, it would be this way.
Okay, and just show the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the back of it so that it understands. Okay. And in terms of what are you looking at on that piece of headliner? What does it show?
So it shows blood, and it also shows the directionality of the blood.
Okay. And if you could show on the picture that's in front of you on the screen what your area of the car you're talking about.
Is it okay to put this away?
Please, yes.
John, maybe please step back from the
Sure.
Oh man. Yeah, but you know what? This we're gonna see. They're gonna try to challenge this scientific evidence. It's gonna be pretty hard though. Boss baby, what's good?
Hello.
Make sure you guys hit that subscription button for your boy. Hit a thumbs up. Man,
So
hit
in
that
terms
thumbs up.
of the
Like,
image that we're looking at here,
Damn,
can
a lot
you
of
show the
y'all
ladies and
watching,
gentlemen of the
so
jury
I'm like,
where
thumbs up.
that blowback pattern was?
Let's get it.
It would be in. Is there a way to make it circle?
Would you like to draw?
Yes.
Oh, if I may.
It would be in this area right in here. It's a little bigger than I drew, but it's in this general area right here.
Okay. In terms of the information about that DNA, why is it important to know whose DNA that is?
Well, it's unusual to have the blowback on the headliner, so of course, and for this shooting incident, we would want to identify where that blood came from. So that's why it was sent to the lab to determine whose blood it was.
And was that determination made?
It was.
Okay. And whose blood was that?
That was the front seat passenger's blood.
In terms of the location and the pattern, what does that tell you about the orientation of the front seat passenger's head at the time of the shooting?
The front seat passenger's head was actually down, almost as if he was sleeping. So it was down, leaning on the right, at an angle. So his head was at an angle as he was seated in that front seat.
Would a demonstrative of the head help illustrate that point?
Sure.
Okay. I'm showing, was previously shown to the defense counsel and used by the witness yesterday labeled as BMEO 18-3118 by Dr. McDougall.
Sure. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the witness will be using a demonstrative to assist in explaining or illustrating his testimony. Just remember that the testimony of the witness is the evidence. These demonstrative aids are not to be considered as evidence unless they're later received in evidence. Only items of evidence go back with you during deliberations for your further examination. All right.
So Sergeant Williams, Dr. McDougall indicated on that particular head the entrance and exit wound on that. Is that consistent with your review of the autopsy photographs and crime scene photographs in this case?
It is.
And based on your analysis of this vehicle, did you find any projectiles anywhere in the headliner?
No.
Did you find any projectiles in the top portion of the B pillar on the passenger side?
No.
What about the A pillar?
No.
Was there any projectiles in the front windshield?
No.
Based on your training and experience, can you state where the exit wound of that head had to have gone through? Where that projectile would have had to have exited that vehicle?
It would have exited through the front passenger window.
How can you say that?
Number one, there's no glass there. However, most importantly is the projectile entered in the back of his skull and exited through the front of his skull with his head at a resting angle. So, can I get up?
Please, that would help and assist in showing.
Speaking earlier about the hose in the direction that it came from. And you will get that with a close, with a very close shot. That blowback then proceeded after the shot. It went up, it hit this headliner and continued and falling into the back seat.
And so I want to go to some of the other photos. There's a yellow jacket that's on the very back of the vehicle. Is it important to know whose DNA and blood was found on that?
What yellow jacket?
Let me come back to that, the other photos, so we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so in terms of the location of the firearm that fired the shot, and we were just talking about in CSW 6745, does this attempt to accurately recreate the potential location of that firearm?
So the purpose of this photograph is strictly demonstrative to show where once the projectile enters into the head, you're going to have the blowback, which again will come up, strike the headliner, and then continue. It's actually continuing this way and landing back here behind the driver in this area of the vehicle.
In terms of the driver and the t-shirt that he was wearing, Do you take into account the location of the victim's DNA on his shirt?
Well, based upon the blowback pattern up here, I would expect to find some blowback here if on a driver, if a driver was there.
So would you expect to find the DNA of Anthony Williams on the front of the driver's shirt?
Yes.
Okay. And were you made aware that that is the results that were in this case?
Later on, yes.
And in terms of how does that help with a check and balance on your work?
So that confirms my analysis with the blowback, that the blowback came back, went, like I said, went up. It's going to fall here, and then it's going to continue to fall into this back seat.
Okay, so I want to move on again, and you talked about like a wound that was close. Do you look for things like stippling in photographs?
Yes, so we'll look for stippling, and it's also referred to as tattooing.
Okay, and did you notice any of that powder tattooing in the photographs of the deceased Anthony Williams?
Yes, there was some there. However, due to the fact that Anthony Williams has an intermediate object, i.e. the head back, what do they call it?
Headrest.
The
Is that the
headrest.
word you're looking for? Okay.
Due to the headrest being there, that's an intermediate item. So the projectile was able to go into into Anthony Williams. However, whenever you fire a gun, you have gunshot residue that's going to come out of the barrel and out of the ejection port. In this case, because of the position of Mr. Williams's head and the intermediate object of the headrest assumed most of the GSR, the gunshot residue, and then only some of it went into Mr. Williams.
Without a pattern, can you give any sort of a range of distance?
No, I cannot.
So, do you also look at ejection patterns for casings?
You can look at ejection patterns. I generally don't, because it is a very strong variable. Semi-automatic firearms have springs, and depending on the age of the firearm, the springs will start to wear. The way the firearm is held will dictate where the cartridge is ejected. The spring will determine where the cartridge is ejected. If there's wind, that will have an effect. So it's not necessarily going to help with determining where, just doing any analysis on any ejection port, any ejection analysis from a firearm.
In terms of an enclosed space such as this, does that also make a difference?
It would. Well, I would expect the cartridge to remain into the vehicle, and that's all I would expect for this.
In terms of the angle of the entry without the actual body, can you do that?
No.
Is it common practice to take a body and put it back in the car after autopsy?
It is not. However, it can be done if the body was in place upon scene. We can make a preliminary analysis there. I don't believe the Miramar Police Department had that opportunity. These individuals were brought right into the hospital, so that opportunity was lost.
Okay. In terms of the firearm itself, were you ever presented with a firearm that was said to you to be the one used in this case?
No.
So, we talked about the back spatter. On the medical examiner's report, did you review the medical examiner's report for the backseat passenger, Christopher Thomas?
I did.
Who was it that noticed a mislabeled entrance and exit wound.
I noticed that.
And what did you do when you realized that there was an issue or concern with the report?
I notified you that there was an issue, that a defect in Mr. Thomas was labeled twice.
Okay. And so what, after that was done, did you look through the photos from the hospital?
I did, because I observed that Mr. Thomas had a defect on his right calf area, or I'm sorry, quadricep area, the upper part of his leg, that came from the door, and it entered into the seat. And when I was looking at the autopsy photos of Mr. Thomas, I would expect to find an exit wound from the medical examiner's office, and they did not have a picture to produce that, and it wasn't annotated in their report. So again, I notified you of this discrepancy as well.
And in terms of, were you able to figure out and determine which projectile caused that specific injury based on your reconstruction?
I was.
So we talked a little bit about the shots to Anthony Williams. I'm going to move on and talk to any of the injuries to Christopher Thomas. What did you look at in review in trying to establish a shooting reconstruction of the injuries to Mr. Thomas?
So the rods from the rear of the vehicle, Mr. Thomas assumed most of his injuries from the rear of the vehicle. I believe 5 projectiles entered him from the rear of the vehicle. 1 projectile entered him on his quadricep, right quadricep. Okay. And I believe 2 projectiles entered him on his foot. And that's going from memory. All right, these autopsy photos, or?
So I'm going to come here to 6754, your photograph on that.
Okay, so these are the terminal points from the rear of the vehicle. Mr. Thomas is seated in this position, and of the 6 rounds that went into the seat, Mr. Thomas assumed 5 of them, and it is a very similar pattern in Mr. Thomas's back. It may not look like it lines up correctly, however.
Let me interrupt you just there for a second before we go. On the top photograph that is labeled and marked as H, did that wound intersect in any way with the body of Christopher Thomas?
No.
Where was that projectile or defect later found?
That projectile perforated the headrest and continued to go forward in the vehicle and ended up striking Mr. Williams and I believe his back.
Okay. So I want to go forward on the back of the car. You take this picture, CSW_6760. What are you showing with this particular photograph?
So these are the trajectory rods that have entered into the vehicle. They are not exactly at the correct angle. The reason being, obviously, there's no glass. So they perforated the glass first, and then they made a secondary perforation into the seats. So that's why they're not exactly level.
So, Sergeant, are you saying that the end of these rods is where those shots were fired from?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm missing the glass. So the glass would, obviously, if I can take a rod and put it through the glass and then into the terminal point, I would be able to obtain this picture to be demonstrably correct.
Okay, in terms of the angles and things that you measured on these, how did you get those angle measurements?
So what I ended up doing is recreating the back glass based on putting tape across the entire back of the window and making it line up with the glass that's existing in place on the top, sides, and bottom, and lined it up with that to make the arch of the glass window, and then ended up putting these rods into the proper position, and then created by right angles to create the proper angles for these strike marks.
In terms of the location in which the gun was fired that created these defects in the car, can you say it was a certain distance away with specificity?
I can give a range for these shots and for the shots on the side of the vehicle.
Okay. And in terms of the range, are you saying it could be a mile away at a 50-foot ladder?
No, I can give a specific range.
And how can you do that in this case?
So the specific range is based upon the two shooters that were presented to me, and I would obtain measurements.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection?
Go separate. Can we go separate?
Sure.
Haven't heard as many objections today as we've had in previous days. Haven't been that many objections to his testimony. I think in part because it's, like I said, science. You're going to call in other scientists, and these methods that he's using are proven. I think for the second day, this is a horrible day for Jamell Demons, a.k.a. YNW Melly. As I just do. I think it's horrible. Because there's no way that you can tell me, again, as a civilian, I don't have a horse in a race. I don't want to see somebody go to death row that doesn't belong on death row. Like, I don't want that. Nor do I want the actual, if they're not the perpetrators, I don't want some random perpetrators walking around in society, you know, they got two bodies on them. And nah, I'm not with that. I'm not with that. What I'm believing, and this is just how I feel, if YNW Bortland is watching this, then I feel at some point he gonna be to testify. If Melly is convicted, they might take the capital punishment off the table later on if he was willing to come forward and say, hey, and then they get a 2-for-1. Because as it's looking right now, I mean, they still may be able to convict both of them, but I know that they want to get one conviction for sure. They don't want two people to walk away after they went through all this. Like, that'll really be bad. That'll be bad for them. I don't think they'll let. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, Melly might not. He probably wouldn't, because he would still want to try to, like, affect his appeals. But he's gonna have to sit down for a long time, man. He's gonna have to sit down.
Okay, Sergeant, you can answer that question.
Why don't you restate the question, Councilman?
So you were discussing that how you would find and determine angles and ranges for specific individuals that are presented to you.
Yes.
How would you do that?
So I would obtain a shooting height a maximum, what we would determine as a maximum shooting height, which would be standing with your arm out at 90 degrees. That height would be obtained from the ground to your arm, to your finger essentially. And then a minimum shooting height, which would be squatting with the same arm out and measurement from here to your finger. And then that would give me a minimum and a maximum range of fire. Once I have a minimum and maximum range of fire, that gets added into more trig to determine a minimum and maximum distance of that particular shooter.
So with regards to this incident, were you there on scene?
No.
Do you know who fired the shots?
No.
In terms of the shots to the outside of the vehicle, are you aware the individual's already dead when those were fired?
They were already dead, yes.
Objection, Your Honor.
How does that play into your reconstruction?
It comes into play because specifically with Christopher Thomas, because Christopher Thomas was already deceased when these rounds were coming into the back of the vehicle, because Christopher Thomas was what we would call crumbling. He was starting to fall, if you will. And on top of that, I know that he was already deceased because the back of his back, essentially, the rounds that are in his back, have no blood in them, which means that there's no circulation. So the rounds are coming in. Christopher Thomas is crumbling with each round. He's falling with each round, and that's the answer.
Okay. So in terms of, we'll get to the shooting inside the car in a little bit. I want to stick to the outside at this point. When you were looking at the side of the car on the angles of entry and the side-to-side angles that I'm talking about, why is that important in your analysis? I'm going to go back to 4809 to describe those angles.
So these angles are important because it is part of my assignment, which is to determine if this is a drive-by shooting. And my determination was that this is not a drive-by shooting, and it's based upon this picture here, which is a very good picture to describe it. All of these rounds are done, and all but one is done at a stationary position. The shooter is at a stationary position when all but one of these rounds are going in. The one round that has some movement in it, which is round site L here, the shooter is actually moving in that to create the little bit of a keyhole that you see there.
Okay, a lot of information in that answer, so let's break it down a little bit. You mentioned a keyhole, so I'm going to zoom in on site L and explain what is a keyhole.
So a keyhole is a projectile comes out of the barrel and it is actually spinning in a line. It's also falling as it spins. However, once you add movement to the gun at the same time the projectile is coming out, you introduce that movement to the projectile. Once the projectile has altered movement, it will start to tumble. So it's no longer going in a straight line. It is actually going like head over feet, if you will, as it's entering into its target. And that head over feet gives you this right here, which is essentially the projectile coming in sideways.
And in terms of a drive-by shooting, if two vehicles were moving at 45 miles per hour, what would you expect to see?
So if it's a drive-by shooting, all of these rounds should look like this.
Why?
Because movement is being introduced to that projectile.
So to contrast site L with one of the other sites like you, what does that tell you?
So that's a shot that the shooter is stationary. The vehicle is stationary.
And so, Sergeant, were you given a copy of what's been previously introduced into evidence, the statement of the co-defendant Cortland Henry?
No.
Okay. In terms of the information as to the suspected location on Miramar Parkway that was initially reported to law enforcement, was that told to you?
The hospital scene?
No, right off of I-75.
Objection, relevance.
Excuse me, why don't you come sidewalk?
Oh man. Let me see. How they high in the back, but low on the side? They think we nah. To go back, Naya, to what you were saying about yeah, that's the state's theory that either the defendants you know, did whatever they did to the individuals. Then they had to figure out what to do. So they said that sheesh, what the hell? So they said that the either Melly or Bortland got out the car, did whatever they did to the car, and then, you know, took them to the hospital, dropped them off, changed clothes on the way, whatever. But the fact that people say, why was he arrested? It didn't take them long. You know, when they go to a crime scene, everybody watch First 48. If you ain't watched First 48, you seen something similar. You know, as soon as a crime like this is committed, they show up, they stick all them rods through the car to see the angles of which the you know, the victims was hit. And I'm pretty sure right after they stuck them rods or lasers or whatever they used, sometimes they use lasers, that they realized it wasn't a drive-by. So if your story was it was a drive-by, you know what I mean, and then the evidence doesn't support that, then you suspect. Like all the time. For instance, a husband and a wife, and you commit and you the husband and you do something to the wife, and you say, oh well, I was at the gym at the time that it happened, and then they find out that, you know, you showed up at the gym, but it was 30 minutes after her actual time of death, and it only takes 10 minutes to get to the gym. You become the top suspect because your story don't add up. You know what I mean? And they see you at Walmart the day before buying trash bags and shovels.
About the Miramar Parkway and I-75.
Like, your stories don't add. I mean,
September road.
I mean, not in this case, but I'm just
there yet.
speaking
We'll get there.
hypothetically.
So in terms of, for your training and experience, if two vehicles are moving on a roadway at the same speed, identical speed, are you still going to get these keyholes on that?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of other drive-by shootings that you have investigated, have you seen straight 90-degree entry angles on those?
Absolutely not.
What instead is going to be more indicative of a drive-by shooting?
Keyholes.
Okay. In terms of changes in the entry angle, side to side, what would you look for in an actual drive-by shooting?
I would look for directionality and, again, the keyholes. So if you have two vehicles going in the same direction, I would expect them to have the keyholes, but I would also if you're being shot at, it's natural to step on the gas and go, which would put you either,
Excuse me, what's the objection? Now,
Speculation. Speculation.
which would put you either above or forward or behind your shooter. And once that happens, I mean, it's human nature, then we would start to have directionality keyholes from different directions. There's no way that you're going to sit there and let someone shoot you.
Okay. In terms of, is there a demonstrative that would assist in showing the jury what you mean by directionality?
Yes, I believe I have one actually. Or you have one, okay.
You've previously shown defense counsel.
And I'm objecting on the same basis. Discuss.
It's a demonstrative at this point, Your Honor, so I believe the appropriate instruction should be read.
Thank you. Can I see what you're showing?
Sure.
There's objection to this? The witness is going to be using a demonstrative to assist in explaining or illustrating his testimony. The testimony of the witness is the evidence. The demonstrative is not evidence unless it's later received as evidence, and so it shouldn't be considered as evidence. The evidence is the witness' testimony. If it's later received as evidence, it'll go back to the jury room with you.
I don't want him put to death.
You
don't have to be.
And so you mentioned directionality. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what's being illustrated in this demonstrative photo?
So these are, obviously the author of this book has already identified the angle for all of these, so that I'm not going to discuss the angle. The question is directionality, and the directionality for each of these is you'll be looking for the leading edge of the entrance. So for this particular, so we'll start with 40 degrees. This is coming in. I went out to US 27 and Pembroke Road, and actually brought the vehicle, had the vehicle towed out there as well to the site that was determined by the Miramar Police Department, and I actually obtained different heights.
Although I'm coming in 3 years later from this investigation, so the bank on the side of the road can be different. It can be higher, it can be lower, but I wanted to put the vehicle in place and have that have those distances as an option, and just to say that I did it. I also went out to 27 and Pembroke Road and had the Public Works Division from Miramar clear the entire brush area, and I actually